Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on the procedure in the silent way method. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would have some understanding of the nature of the procedures that are involved in the silent way method when it is used for teaching and learning a language, a second language in a classroom. Well, when it comes to a standard format, the first part of the lesson focuses on pronunciation. Depending on student level, the class might work on sounds or on phrases or even on sentences that are designated on the fiddle chart. So, it is the teacher who would decide, depending upon the level of the students, whether it has to be on the level of the sounds or on the level of the words or on the bigger level or the higher level of sentences. At the beginning stage, the teacher will model the appropriate sound after pointing to a symbol on the chart. So, the very first modeling is done by the teacher, but the teacher is expected to do it only once. It has to be done on the minimum scale. Later, the teacher will silently point to the individual symbols and combinations of utterances and monitor students' utterances. And the most of the time of the class would go to the learners to pronounce or to give voice to those sounds or to those combinations of sounds. The teacher would use a pointer to indicate stress, phrasing, and intonation when it comes to a sentence. For example, the stress would be referred to by the teacher by touching certain symbols more forcibly than others when pointing out a word. So, when phrase or a word is presented in front of the students on the whiteboard, for example, or on the chalkboard, the teacher would touch or would press certain parts of a word or a phrase or a symbol with more force to kind of give a clue to the learners that this is where more stress is to be given while uttering them. As far as intonation and phrasing are concerned, it would be demonstrated by tapping on the chart to the rhythm of the utterance. So the teacher would be a silent facilitator in the whole process. After practice with the sounds of the language, sentence pattern structures and vocabulary are to be practiced. The teacher models an utterance while creating a visual realization of it with the colored rods. So these colored rods are used as supporting objects. After modeling the utterance, the teacher will have a student attempt to produce it. Once a structure is introduced and understood, the teacher will create a situation in which the students can practice the structure through the manipulation of the rods. Now, here two things are important. One, that a situation or a context is to be created by the teacher so that the learning becomes meaningful. Secondly, the practice of the structure is to be done by the students so that they get the maximum of the practice and the teacher remains silent. The sample lesson illustrates a typical lesson format, and the language being taught is Thai, for which this is the first lesson. So let us share that. So if you look at the screen, what you would notice is at the very top, I would start with where the teacher empties rods onto the table. Then the teacher picks up 2 or 3 rods of different colors, and after each rod is picked up, the teacher says something. Now, this can be in Thai language, so of course we would not be able to pronounce that. The teacher holds 1 rod for any color and indicates to a student that a response is required. The student again responds to that. Again, in bracket, the Thai response is given. If response is incorrect, teacher elicits response from another student who then models for the first student. Now, what is important here is that the teacher himself or herself does not correct. The teacher rather asks another student to facilitate or to help or to elicit it for the first student. Then the teacher picks up a red rod and says, again, gives the minimum structure in Thai language as given in the parenthesis. Then the teacher picks up a green rod and again utters the phrase. The teacher picks up either a red or a green rod and then elicits response from student. If response is incorrect, the procedure is still to be, kind of remodeled and to be repeated by another student. So basically this is a process of pair learning where a student, if is unable to do it, to perform it, another student comes for support. The teacher holds up 2 rods of a different color and then elicits student response. At the next stage, the teacher introduces additional number based on what the class can comfortably retain. Now, this is an important point. The teacher would introduce as much as the class can comfortably retain. Other colors might also be introduced. Rods are put then in a pile, and the teacher indicates through his or her own actions that rods should be picked up and the correct utterance made. Now, what would happen? As a group, the students would pick up rods and would make utterances. So the peer group performance and the peer group correction would continue, and peer group correction actually would be encouraged. The teacher then says, again here it is given in Thai, where the teacher would say, keep on doing this. And the teacher indicates that a student should give the teacher the rods that the teacher has asked for. So most of the times the teacher is just using gestures or is pointing to the rods, whereas the speaking activity is carried out by the students. Then teacher asks the students in the class to give him or her the rods that he or she has asked for. And this all is, by the way, to be done through the target language with unambiguous actions on the part of the teacher. Now the teacher indicates that the students should give each other commands regarding the calling for the rods. So now what is going to happen is the teacher is out of the way now, and the students are going to, or the learners are going to do this as pairs. Experimentation is encouraged, and the teacher speaks only to correct an incorrect utterance if no other pair in the group can do that kind of correction. Actually, this whole activity that I have shared, it is given by Joel Wiskin in the work Personal Communication, and I think this can be replicated when the teachers want to use the silent way method. Well, my dear students, actually this method and the proponent of this method, Gattegno, refers to the innovations in the method that derive from various sources. Number 1, the manner in which classroom activities are organized, they are unique. Number 2, the indirect role the teacher is required to assume in directing and monitoring the learner's performance is unique in the sense that the teacher keeps silent for most of the time. And number 3, the responsibility that is placed on the learners to figure out and to test their hypotheses about how the language works. So it is through independent learning process and through the inner judgment of what they are learning that the learners would evaluate what they have learned is right and what needs correction. And thus through self-awareness and through self-correction, independently the learners would learn in the silent way method.